everything just came down on me, and I just couldn't stand it another minute. And that's what I wrote on the stuff, is I just can't stand this.
Before we get into today's video, I want to let you guys know that this video is for educational purposes only. Please remember to be kind to everybody everywhere, in your everyday life, in your home, in the grocery store, and especially in the comment section down below. Please do not show hate to anybody, anywhere. So good morning, good morning, good morning. How is everybody doing today? I hope you all are having an amazing day. I hope you all have had a wonderful week so far. I hope everybody is doing great. So in today's video, we're going to be talking about a situation that happened quite a while ago. And man, this case is so interesting to me. And the more I dug into it, the more back and forth I went on what exactly could have happened and why it happened. I'm going to tell you guys a story anyways, to the best of my ability, with the public information that is already out there. So y'all go do your own research and form your own opinions, because I'm not a professional. But at the end of the video, I will tell you guys my opinion, or the conclusion that I think I've come up with. What I think happened at the end of the video. So make sure you guys stay to the end of the video if you want to know my opinion. Before we go any further, I did want to stop and thank today's sponsor, AG1. AG1 is a science-driven formulation of vitamins, probiotics, and whole food sourced ingredients that support our brain, gut, and immune system. It combines what you would normally get from a multivitamin, and it puts it into like a more simpler form that increases your health baseline. I know for me personally, I used to take a bunch of multivitamins. I would take this vitamin for this, or this vitamin for this, or this vitamin for that. And now I just drink my AG1 in the morning time and I feel great. AG1 is a daily foundation nutrition supplement that actually supports whole body health. I mean, it helps everything from your gut to your immune health, your focus and energy, healthy aging, stress and mood balance, and just your overall nutrient replenishment. I try to eat a pretty well-balanced diet. However, me taking my AG1 makes me feel good, because I know whatever I'm not getting from my food is being supplemented through AG1, all in one drink in the morning. I don't have to take, some vitamins in the morning, some vitamins at night. I just drink it in the morning. I feel great. I feel energized. I feel clear in my mind, and I'm good to go. If you want to try AG1, all you got to do is click the link down in the description box or scan the code here on the screen, and you will get a free 1-year supply of AG vitamin D3 plus K2 plus 5 AG1 travel packs with your first purchase of AG1. Those little travel packs really do come in handy, and they fit so easily in your purse or in your vehicle or in your pocket. So again, if you want to try AG1, all you got to do is click the link down in the description box, and you can get your free products with your first purchase today. Thanks again, AG1. So, okay, let's talk about Betty. Betty, whose real name is Elizabeth Ann Broderick, was born on November 7th, 1947, and grew up in Brooklyn, New York. But everybody called her Betty. She is the third of 6 children to her parents, Marita and Frank, who owned a successful plastering business. Marita and Frank were reported to be very strict parents, and Betty would say that she was being trained to be a housewife. She would say that she was sent to a Catholic school, and she was told to be very careful with dating until she found a good Catholic man. And she was told that she would need to support him and bless him with beautiful children one day. And realistically, it just kind of sounds pretty typical for back in that, era or time frame. Now, Betty was considered a good girl growing up. She went on to finish high school. She didn't really get into any trouble. She ended up going to college in the Bronx, and she got a degree in early childhood development. Now, at the time, back in 1965, when Betty was just 17 years old, she met a 21-year-old man named Daniel Broderick. Now, she ended up meeting him at an event at the University of Notre Dame. Now, Dan, he was a medical student at the time. So to her, she was, she was early childhood development, basically like she went to college to be a teacher. And then now she's met this older man who is very good looking. And he's going to school to be in the medical field. Now, Dan was actually born in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and he was the oldest son of a very large Irish Catholic family whose family had pretty similar parenting and like values and the way that they believe that their kids should grow up and live their lifestyle as Betty's. So to her, she had literally found the exact man, or dream man at that she was supposed to find. Because of Dan's upbringing as well, he was ready to get married to Betty pretty much right away, and his family was really supportive and happy about it as well. Betty would even go on to say that Dan never once wavered from his goal of making her his wife. She said that he basically had told her that he would wait and he would do whatever and say whatever was necessary, and that he would even go as far as agreeing with her with things that maybe he didn't necessarily agree with in order to just make her happy. He would do anything he needed to do until he had her, is what she basically said. And she also said that nobody ever used the terms obsessive compulsive or stalker back then, but she said that's what he was. So he was willing to do whatever, say whatever, and to her, she was just like in love with it. But she says looking back, it was obsessive. The two did go on to get married on April 12th of 1969 in New York, and Betty immediately became pregnant and soon gave birth to their first daughter, Kim, in 1970. Now, by 1979, Betty gave birth to 4 more children, a daughter named Lee, a son named Daniel, and another son named Rhett, and another son who tragically passed away 4 days after being born. At this point, Betty had totally stepped into her role as a stay-at-home mom, whom what she said everybody wanted her to be. Everybody wanted her to be this, barefoot and pregnant, stay-at-home mom type of woman. And she said that she did it, and she did it well, while Dan went on to go to Harvard, and this is when he went after his law degree. Now, he had already completed medical school and ended up getting his doctor's degree at this point, but he wanted to change career paths, and so he went to law school. This man is intelligent, okay? Very intelligent. Not only did he get his degree to become a doctor, but he goes to school at Harvard to become a lawyer, passes the bar, and all that good jazz. Now, after he did this, the family ended up moving to San Diego, California, and this is where Dan eventually became a very successful medical malpractice lawyer. Like, hello, because now he's got the education in both worlds. Now, at first, he wasn't making really good money like right away, and Dan's salary at the law firm was actually quite small. But with time, Betty urged Dan to start his own practice. Like, she was at home, encouraging him, pushing him as his backbone of a wife, right? And that's exactly what Dan eventually ended up doing. And when he did, this is when he hit success. And I mean big success. And it was pretty much overnight. All it took was for Dan to win his first multi-million-dollar case, and the Brodericks became millionaires. They literally went from pretty much struggling, her staying home, him, back and forth in school. She's raising all of the kids, encouraging him. He steps out, starts his own practice, and boom, they're millionaires. Because of this, the couple was well known in San Diego in all the social circles, and they really enjoyed the life of popularity and prestige, I guess you could say. However, behind closed doors, the couple's marriage started to fall apart. See, Betty was constantly complaining that Dan was gone all the time. He was working. I listened to an interview where she said that he would be gone anywhere from 10 to 14 hours plus a day, and that he was spending way too much time working. And then when he wasn't working, he was socializing. He was rubbing elbows with people, making connections, and growing the business. Now, Betty said that she felt like she was just a single parent. She was the only one taking care of the kids. She was home by herself all the time with the kids, and Dan was basically always gone. Then, in 1982, Dan came home and told Betty that he had hired somebody. Because, see, at this point, he was a one-man show. And that was actually her words as well. She said that he was doing everything himself. So when he came home and told her that he had hired somebody, she was excited. She was like, oh, you hired somebody? Great. Now you can be home with us more. And you think about it, you guys. When you're in a partnership, you're married and you're making all these sacrifices, like in their case, they're building a business. The husband's gone all the time. You would think the goal is to get to a place in your business that it's making good enough money that a way y'all can spend more time together as a family. So when he comes home and tells her that he hired somebody, this is exactly where she thought they were. Until she asked him who he hired. This is when Dan told her that he hired a 21-year-old Dutch-American woman named Linda. As early as October 1983, Betty was suspicious of Dan and Linda. And as a matter of fact, she wasn't too excited from the beginning that out of all the people that he had hired this woman, because she was 21 years old and she had no experience in anything that Dan was doing with his malpractice law firm. So in her mind as the wife, you're finally hiring somebody and this is who you're hiring. However, when Betty confronted her husband, he denied it, and it just did not sit right with Betty. She said that she knew that he was lying because one day Betty waited all day and night at Dan's law office to celebrate his 38th birthday. She showed up there at 4 p.m. So it's his birthday. She's expecting for him to get off of work at least a decent time. When she shows up there at 4 o'clock, she realizes that when the two of them went out to lunch, they never came back. So they went out for lunch. It's 4 o'clock. She's sitting there and they don't come back. Now, she said when she started to walk around in the office, this is when she saw a photo of her husband, Dan, in the chick Linda's office on the wall, but it was a young photo of him. It was a photo of him before the two of them even got married. And Betty was like, that is really strange and pretty inappropriate. Like, why would you have that photo on your wall in your office? Betty drove home that evening in a complete rage, and she took all of Dan's clothes and threw them in the yard, and she set them on fire. And we're talking about very expensive custom tailored suits. Then in February of 1985, Dan ended up moving out against Betty's wishes, and she felt like she was trying everything. Like she was trying to grasp onto her marriage with everything that she had, but nothing seemed to work. And it was also said later that Dan actually ended up having to take custody of their 4 children because she would leave them, she would leave them one by one on Dan's doorstep. Betty says that Dan did end up admitting to having an affair with Linda, which then caused a long, drawn-out, very messy divorce. This actually became one of the ugliest divorces in the United States, and it got so much attention that the Oprah Winfrey Show even contacted Betty to get an interview. Betty declined the interview at this time, but later she did end up doing an interview or two with Oprah. Now, by this time, Dan was a very prominent lawyer, and he was earning over $1 million, and he was the president of the San Diego Bar Association. Betty says that he was making like $140-something thousand a month, and guys, remember, this is even way back then. Because of how prominent Dan was, okay? And he's defending all these high-profile people. He's winning these cases. He's making all this money. He's a socialite. He's going out. Because of that and his connections, Betty said it was almost impossible for her to find a lawyer that was willing to represent her in the divorce, which she said is what ended up putting her at a very serious disadvantage. And I just cannot even imagine being in that situation. Betty also said that she believed that Dan's influence is what helped him to get sole custody of their children. She said he ended up cheating her out of her rightful share of his income, and he even sold the house against her wishes. She didn't want to sell it. Betty said that she was so angry that she allegedly broke into his home and spray painted his bedroom and smeared food all over his kitchen, which, listen, when I watched the interviews of this, if everything Betty is saying is true, no, doing all this stuff, burning his clothes and all this stuff isn't right. But you can see how she was losing her mind at this point, right? Because how do you even go up against this guy? Now, the divorce was finalized in 1989, and this was 4 years after Dan first filed for the divorce. And by this time, Betty's behavior was actually becoming worse and worse and worse. And she was becoming like violent and erratic. Betty would go on to leave hundreds of like obscene, threatening, frankly, evil messages on Dan's answering machine, and even ignored several restraining orders that Dan took out against her. And I should have told you that he was living with that girl, Linda, too, at the time. And he had even changed his voicemail. So when you called his house, it was Linda that would be on the recording. And Betty always believed that he was messing with her. Like he would do little things to mess with her. Because she couldn't get into court and get alimony at first, he agreed to give her $9,000 a month, okay, which $9,000 a month for child support and alimony, and he got the kids like, even back then. However, anytime Betty did something that he didn't agree with, and she was doing a lot of things she shouldn't have done, calling him, cussing him out, doing all this crazy mess, whatever. But anytime she didn't do something, he would deduct money from her, like alimony, kind of like an allowance. And Betty said that even 1 month, she ended up getting like an IOU from Dan for $1,300. So instead of him paying her $9,000 alimony, she did too many bad things that she lost all the money and even went into the hole for $1,300. So like, it seemed like things were just really freaking weird. And Betty was just unraveling. Now, she, at this point, was not supposed to step even a foot on Dan's property, but she just basically did not care. Betty would go and she would vandalize Dan's home, and she even drove her car into his front door while their children were literally sitting inside the house. She got arrested with a knife on her, and she was held in psychiatric care for 72 hours. In 1989, Dan would go on to marry Linda, the assistant that he hired, okay? Now, Linda was absolutely terrified that Betty was going to show up there and act crazy at the wedding, which rightfully so. So they ended up having like armed guards guarding the wedding so Betty couldn't come there and do something crazy. And Dan actually wore a bulletproof vest just in case Betty decided to show up some way, somehow, and do something unthinkable. Betty never showed up at the wedding. However, after the wedding, Betty claimed that Linda teased her by mailing her facial cream and weight loss slimming treatment ads. And this, of course, only further enraged Betty. Some of the interviews that I listened to with Betty, she said that Dan would constantly tease her. Like in her mind, she believed that her husband Dan was just going through a midlife crisis. As a matter of fact, she said that she had friends whose husbands around this age had done the same thing. Like they had been together. They grew up in these very strict, Catholic or religious type of homes. They made these commitments very young to a woman. And then in their midlife, they would have this crisis. So they would go off, find another woman and say they wanted a divorce, but they would end up coming back to the family. So Betty said in the back of her mind, she always believed that they were going to get back together. However, she said in the meantime, Dan kept torturing her too, that he would tell her that she was too old and too ugly and too boring, and that his new wife was young and beautiful and vibrant. And I don't know if that really happened because I wasn't there, but if that did happen, like they were just, ugh. Now, the fact that allegedly Dan and his new wife, Linda, were picking at her and like teasing her behind the scenes, what they did not know was that Betty had recently at this point purchased a brand new Smith & Wesson revolver. And then just 7 months after Dan and Linda got married, Betty decided to use that revolver. At around 5:30 a.m. on November 5th of 1989, Betty drove to Dan's house and used a key that she had taken from their daughter Kim to enter the home while Dan and Linda were sleeping. Betty then pulled out her firearm, she shot and killed both of them. 2 bullets hit Linda in the head and the chest, killing her instantly, and 1 bullet ended up hitting Dan in the chest while he was reaching for the phone. 1 bullet hit the wall and 1 hit the nightstand. Dan was just 17 days shy of his 45th birthday, and Linda was just 28 years old. After Betty left the home, she went and called her daughter. Her daughter's name is Lee, and she was telling her daughter that she went there and she was going to go there, I guess, and end her own life right in front of him. But instead, she just fired. She didn't know what happened, and she didn't know if it hit anybody. And so then she went and turned herself in to the police. Now, she never denied that she pulled the trigger, but she said that she was not planning on actually hurting them, and that she only wanted to, do that to herself and basically mess with them, scare them, and I guess traumatize them. I mean, the whole thing sounds so freaking far out. She said that when she went there, she was startled by Linda yelling, "Call the police, call the police." And when she did, she ended up, pulling the trigger, and it happened by accident. Betty was indeed arrested, and she then began her trial process. So in the fall of 1990, Betty's lawyer said that she was actually a battered wife, and that's what they were going to be using for her defense. The lawyer claimed that Betty was pushed over the edge by years of psychological and physical and mental abuse by her husband, Dan.
And I was just standing in that kitchen saying, Jesus Christ, I'm turning 42 years old. And I've been put through this bullshit since I was 35. 7 years of my life wasted. I was just a mess. Everything just came down on me, and I just couldn't stand it another minute. And that's what I wrote on the stuff, is I just can't stand this. I'm telling people I'm a child molester and I'm crazy and I'm an unfit mother.
I went into the room to talk to them or to wake them up or something, and they moved and I moved, and it was over. I remember the real loud noise 5 times. But I didn't clearly remember it then. I just remember the noise.
However, the prosecution portrayed Betty as a cold-blooded, in my opinion, a psychopath murderer who planned and plotted to kill Dan just straight up out of jealousy. The prosecutor was quoted saying, "Betty was not a battered woman. She was getting $16,000 a month in alimony. She had $1 million house, a car, a boyfriend. I see abused women every day with broken bones and smashed faces. Give me a break." A forensic psychologist for the prosecution said that Betty had histrionic and narcissistic personality disorders. And then a psychologist for the defense also concluded that Betty was histrionic and had narcissistic features. The medical evidence that was taken from the scene showed that Dan actually didn't die right away, and Betty claimed that she had spoken to him after she had shot him and right before he passed. She says that Dan said, "Okay, you shot me. I'm dead." Can you imagine if he really said that? Okay, you did it. Evidence was also presented at Betty's trial that showed that Betty had removed the phone and answering machine from Dan's bedroom so that he wouldn't be able to call the police. The prosecution also found a taped phone call where Betty said that she wished Dan would just die. I also watched an interview with Betty's children, 2 of them, when they were much older. They looked like they were grown, or maybe, older teenagers, and they were on the Oprah Winfrey show, and they both said that Betty had told them, literally their children, her and Dan's children, she had told them that she was going to kill Dan and Linda. And her son actually said that she said it all the time, but he didn't believe she was really going to do it, but she did do it. Betty's first trial ended with a hung jury when 2 of the jurors just could not reach a verdict on the manslaughter charge due to the lack of intent. One of the jurors was quoted saying, "I only wonder what took her so long." Can you imagine a juror saying that after hearing all of the evidence presented from the defense? The juror says, "I only wonder what took her so long," basically saying, I would have done it a lot sooner. What? Because of that, a mistrial was declared, and Betty was retrialed a year later with the same defense lawyer and the same prosecutor. But at this trial, the jury found Betty guilty of 2 counts of second-degree murder. Betty ended up getting sentenced to 2 consecutive terms of 15 years to life, plus 2 years for illegal use of a firearm. Betty is still locked up to this day, and she is currently serving her sentence at the California Institution for Women in Chino, California. When Betty's been asked about life in prison, Betty said that it's good. She actually said that she's living a lot happier in there than she did when she had all that money and she was out here. Like, isn't that wild? In January of 2010, Betty's first request for parole was denied because they said that she did not show any remorse and she did not acknowledge any wrongdoing. And I found that so interesting because out of all of the interviews that I watched, she never was sorry that I've seen ever for what she did. Whether what she's saying is true, he pushed her over the edge, or him and his new wife pushed her over the edge, whether that's true or not, she believes that's true. So did it happen? Or was that part of her histrionic disorder? I don't know. But she ain't apologized. 2 of her children ended up speaking in her defense at this hearing, and the other 2 spoke against her. However, Betty went back in front of the parole board in 2011 and in 2017, and she will not be eligible again until 2032. And by this time, she will be 84 years old. So what do y'all think? I don't know what to think still. I have watched again so many interviews with her, and I can't tell. I know she did it. I believe she did it on purpose because part of her defense was that she didn't mean to do it. I definitely believe she went there to do it. I mean, she even told her children that she was going to do it. But did he really drive her to the point? See, he said that he was never happy with her. He would go on later to say that she told everybody they had this happy, wonderful marriage, but that he wasn't happy with her and that the marriage behind the scenes was rocky. If she had untreated mental illnesses like histrionic and narcissism, I bet he was unhappy. I bet it was wild. I bet he, who knows what all. But then again, at the same time, you think about being with your husband and pouring all of that into them and pushing them to go out on their own in their own firm. They become successful. They will never come home and spend time with you and your kids. And then they hire a new young assistant and then leave you for, I don't know. Again, none of that makes it okay for what she did. But that's the point that's the part I can't quite figure out is why she really did it. And so if I had to choose one, I'm going to say because of her mental illnesses. What do y'all think? Have y'all heard about this story? Let me know what you guys think in the comment section down below. Other than that, I love y'all. I hope y'all have a wonderful weekend, and I will see y'all in the next video. Love you guys. Bye.